coma where the entire globe has woken up. As the globe wakes up, whenever the lockdown across the world is being lifted, it's begun in a few places today, and as it spreads, the scenario emerging for all of us is going to be different from what it was in the first week of March. And to analyze what it was, what the likely scenario is going to be, and the opportunities that India might have arising out of this, we thought that we must, as part of our series that we are, of webinars that we are putting together with MITRAA, one of the new age consulting companies, we thought it's first to understand what the globe itself might have to offer to the rest of the world in terms of business, new opportunities, how commerce and trade will change going forward. In this context, we were happy and that Ambassador Ganapathi, one of our most distinguished diplomats, agreed to join us. And I had no second thoughts but to reach to my good friend and younger brother, T.S. Sudhir, who needs no introduction really, part of India's exciting TV journalism for the last 2 decades plus. And as somebody who has broken many stories, analyzed many stories, we thought it would be best to request him to anchor this program for us. So we begin this 5-part program with understanding the new world better with Ambassador Ganapathi, and who better but T.S. Sudhir to talk to him. Once again, welcome aboard, and I thank MITRAA for being partnering us and extending us the content. Thank you very much, and over to T.S.
Thank you, Mr. R. Ganapathi. With your permission, if I may just dip into Hindu beliefs, they say it's always good to start something important with Vinayaka or Ganapathi. So we have done precisely that with you. In fact, we are going to do one better. We are going to kickstart this series with Mr. M. Ganapathi, IFS, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. And today he's going to be talking on this very fascinating topic, very relevant to the times that we are living in, which is the new normal in globalization. So welcome, Mr. M. Ganapathi. A pleasure to have you on board to kickstart this series, this webinar series. So we are going to be thinking about and listening to what is this new normal that we are talking about, how normal is the new normal going to be, and whether the dynamics of geopolitics will change by the time the scientists have won the battle against the coronavirus pandemic. So Mr. Ganapathi will speak for about 10 to 12 minutes, and after which we'll throw the floor open for questions. You could start sending in the questions. My only request is if you could keep them brief and crisp so that we can accommodate as many questions as possible in the Q&A session. Mr. Ganapathi, your mic is live now.
Thank you very much, Sudhir. First of all, of course, I would begin by thanking the Southern India Chamber of Commerce for giving me this opportunity to speak on the first ever webinar show, so to say, and grateful also to my dear friend, Mr. R. Ganapathi, the president of the chamber, of course, and greetings to some of our Muslim friends on this holy month of Ramadan, Ramadan Kareem to them. As we know, we are living in a totally different world altogether. April and May, we had many festivities and functions, which we did not celebrate with families and friends as we should have done. In fact, yesterday I'm told was Akshaya Tritiya. You would have had everyone rushing to buy gold. That is a businessman's strength. But we were all within the four corners of our houses, waiting to see what is happening. And what we are also very interestingly observing is this is the year of the rat, according to the Chinese zodiac. And there is a Chinese proverb which says, may you live in interesting times. Now, I don't know whether this is a curse or a blessing. We'll have to wait for it. And whether this brings in some known unknowns or unknown unknowns. So it's all a matter of perception, analysis, and decoding the many strands which are going to be left behind by this very virulent virus called COVID-19. Of course, as you all know, the word new normal was coined in 2003 by a tech wizard called Robert McAfee. But McNamee, I'm also told that this was immediately after the World War I, the word new normal had also come, because the normal course of life, as would have been, had totally changed, bringing in something totally different in not only day-to-day activities, but also in the way nations behave within themselves, and also in terms of their disciplinary interaction with countries outside their domain. Three significant elements. We are in the 21st century. The 21st century, of course, started at the bang, Y2K. Then we had 9/11, not very long ago, which changed the security dimension in political thought. Then, of course, we had 2008-9, where the global economy underwent a series of transformations. And interestingly, the world has still not recovered from that, because if you see the developed world, at least, they've still not gone back to the growth figures as they would have had before 8-9 struck, so to say. What this brings us is 2019-20 with COVID-19. We see a totally different perception on the geo-economic and geopolitical space, so to say. And it will not only leave an impact, an imprint on nations within themselves, but also in terms of the relations between nations. Of course, when you talk of COVID-19, you can't but see the interesting interplay of actions, deeds, and words between the two superpowers, the United States of America and China. Are we here seeing the Thucydides trap, or post-COVID-19, the Kindleberger trap? These are issues which I think analysts will have to look and see what happens. Now, what transformational forces has the new global order unleashed? And that, I think, is what this new normal will all be. You did mention how normal will the new normal be? Maybe there could be a counter question. How abnormal the new normal be? Because I think normality is, to a person who has done chemistry, is by titration. And if we here titrate and filter the various processes which the world is going through, you will find that coming to the right pH is going to be not an easy process altogether. Of course, now what we are going to see is a totally different paradigm where we'll be working in the sense there'll be work from home, there'll be social distancing, there'll be greater emphasis of hygiene. We will all be masked, so to say. So unmasking the truth and the trust will be a difficult process. In fact, the most important normality which we'll have to address is the question of trust and confidence between nations, within nations. And that is where I think within India, just a point on India, this will have a great impact on center-state relations in the days to come. How are the states going to respond to the center's directives? How is the center going to ensure that the states implement it? And how would the states interact between states? So this is going to be an interesting idea which may develop. What is cooperative federalism, meaning within that square, I mean, in the sense of developments. Functioning in government is going to change. I think if you're going to have social distancing, you'll have to work with maybe 1/3 or 1/2 of the present office strength. In fact, the other day, one saw a press report saying that the civil services may be asked to work from home in terms of numbers, maybe odd, even weeks. How would this respond? How would this correspond to realities? How would this have an effect on the question of expenditure? From a diplomatic perspective, I could say that there will be more video conferences. If I have to interact with headquarters, say from a place like London or Washington or Germany or maybe Singapore, I mean, I'll be asked to do a video conferencing. Heads of missions will be video conferencing now. That will be an interesting development, because that will save on expenditure in terms of airfares. It will save on expenditure in terms of accommodation. It will save many other things, in the sense you don't need reams of paper to be printed and circulated. So I think that will be the order of the day, not only from a diplomatic perspective, but also from the perspective of governance and business. I used to say that today a diplomat's main role is to focus on economic development and advise business persons, because the politics within diplomacy has undergone a dramatic change, because the heads of states and governments may not need us to that extent as they would have done in the 18th and 19th century, when horse carriages were the order of the day. Today, heads of missions and heads of countries, heads of states and governments can pick up the telephone or video conference themselves with their counterparts. Very interestingly, you saw the SARC summit of the 8+1, that is Pakistan was represented by the Minister of State for Health, being done through video conferencing. You had the first G20 conference earlier this month also done through video conferencing. Unfortunately, 3 days ago, the second G20 conference could not take place because of certain differences. So that would be a totally different new norm. What happens to the United Nations itself? In fact, the United Nations has faced a lot of flack. Briefly, if one were to touch on WHO and WTO when it comes into play. Where has the COVID-19 scene had a new normal in activity and functioning? Is that in economy and business? In fact, this is the segment which has been the hardest hit. If you look at the figures which had been announced by the Ministry of Commerce just 2 days ago, in terms of the estimated trade turnover for the years 2019-2020, you find that in terms of commodities, the export was $314.31 billion, with imports 467.91. But that was a total drop. There was a negative growth of around 6.33%, the trade deficit being $70.16 billion. Similarly, if you look at services, I think services we did well because we had a positive balance of trade in services. I think the president of the SICCI should be very happy. That is a strength, the services sector, the IT sector. And of course, if you take the cumulative addition of both merchandise and services, I think the deficit was of the order of around $70-odd billion. So I think what has happened is COVID-19 has hit the business sector very hard. In fact, this has largely resulted because of disruptions in supply chains and also in resultant cancellations of orders and bookings, so to say. Interestingly, except for iron ore, all the other sectors have done badly in terms of recording their growth perspective. You see a negative growth rate there. So what is going to happen in the business front in terms of new normal? Would we have the same elements of businessmen traveling across the world? Maybe not. How would they provide for the efficiency and distribution? Maybe through video conferencing. What the government will have to look at is in terms of digitization of the entire process, because you don't have to run around with paper. How does the certificate of origin be factored in? So there will be a large-scale revamping of the entire processes and procedures to maybe make things business-friendly, hopefully. I hope that this creates a new total paradigm shift in the way business is conducted between people, between business persons, business houses, and people themselves and states. And there, I think, the role of the world, the diplomats, would become very, very important because, as I said before, the role of diplomats in business becomes very, very important. Energy would be another matter which I would like to briefly touch upon, because I think there's an oil glut. The other day, just 2 days ago, I think in WhatsApp, we saw a map of the world with various tankers anchored outside harbors or midstream, loaded with petroleum. The problem is there's enough overflow or oversupply, so to say. And of course, the WTI went to negative, but Brent is still trading as around $20 to $22 a barrel. There'll be considerable savings on petrol and petroleum. But what we need to look at, nations and particularly India, is to create energy reserve. We still have not come to where we need to be in terms of catering for the energy reserve. We still have only catered for 1/3 of what we require. That would be an important factor. Agriculture is another sector which would need to be looked at. Of course, fortunately, the WTO, which will be facing a lot of flack in the days to come, because I think there would be a lot of call for not only change in the United Nations Security Council and otherwise, but also in terms of the WTO mechanisms. I was saying in terms of agriculture, fortunately, we had this peace clause negotiated in Nairobi post-Bali of a perpetuity in terms of buffer stocks of developing nations, that they don't have to go report to WTO if they go over 10% in terms of subsidy, or we just report. There'll be no penalties. So that was a good thing, but we need to look at agriculture, which has been hit hard in India in terms of the sowing season having just started. The harvesting season have just started. So this is going to be an issue which is going to come up. In terms of agriculture, food security and job security will come up. Unemployment is of the order of around 22, 23%, or maybe more, I don't know. So this is going to be a serious dent in progress and prosperity. Because if you have unemployment, if you don't provide for the working class, if I could use such a word, with due apologies, I think we are not doing enough justice to equitable growth and development in societies. Defense and security will be another issue which nations will need to see. Do you need to spend or do you not need to spend? Of course, we are in a very interesting state of geographical domain where we continuously have to keep our guard up. We can't keep we have to keep our powder dry, as they say, throughout. One of the interesting things which Dr. Kalam had proposed was the question of greater emphasis on teleeducation and telemedicine. And I remember Dr. Kalam focusing on Africa. Africa has around nearly 50 odd countries. And we had been able to bring in telemedicine and teleeducation to around 48 countries. And that is going to be a very, very important thing. In fact, some of the school teachers and university teachers who have been talking have been mentioning that the new normal in education will now be greater focus on e-learning, distance education, and tele-education, because that is going to be an interesting thing, because that will be doing away with a lot of expenditure again, and maybe it will bring down school fees. It might help the sections of society who would be denied the basic objections of basic objective of education. Transport and communication is an important element which has faced a lot of flack after COVID-19. Infrastructure development will have to be given a lot of focus and emphasis. And of course, the most important sector which has faced a lot of trouble in these difficult days has been aviation, transportation, and the hospitality industry. Aviation, we don't know how the planes will be running after they have been in sort of cold storage for nearly 2 months by the time they start flying. Yeah. The hotel industry, hospitality industry is going to face difficult days as we move ahead. And of course, the entire sector here would need a lot of support. Today, of course, I've kept everyone away from Franklin Templeton and the Reserve Bank of India response to it. But that is going to be an important thing which a lot of people will be focusing on. What we need, of course, from a global context, I'm not talking of isolationism, but there'll be withdrawal, self-reliance in a greater number in terms of countries. R&D and S&T will have to be given a lot more funds for development. And if we don't focus on R&D to move with the times, we might face problems as we are doing now, because the active pharmaceutical ingredients for many of the products which we manufacture come from China. And that's been a global problem, not only a problem of India. I think, so these are some of the issues I thought I'll place before you. Maybe we can focus on other aspects as we move into the question and answer session, because there's just a beginning. But most importantly, when the world resumes its normal operations, it is not going to be like it was in February or March. First of all, you need to generate and garner great trust and confidence. In fact, there's a Russian proverb which says "Proveriyai no doveriyai," which basically means trust but verify. So you have to trust the partner you're dealing with, but you also have to see what sort of trust is, and that there's no mistrust or distrust. So that is going to be the buzzword today. And where will the future lie in terms of global developments? I have no doubt in saying that Indo-Pacific is going to be the thrust area for the future. And let us not forget Africa. Africa has a lot of resilience, a lot of strength, and that has not been discussed in any of the chancelleries or any of the media. And I would like our businessmen to look at Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Of course, Europe, America will always be there. But Europe, EU, with Brexit, how will it be? In terms of the final point, we have the RCEP. We had expressed reservations. Would RCEP be re-engineered to bring us back in? Would the broad-based trade and industrial agreement with the EU also look at some reworking in terms of allowing India to work out the document and sign it? Would nuclear energy and hydroenergy get greater focus than petroleum because of all these issues? Maybe petroleum not, because everyone is seeing at oil at a reduced price. So I think that is what we need to look at. SARC, BIMSTEC, and finally, what happens to BRI? Maybe that will be for the questions and answers. Thank you, Mr. Ganapathi, and thank you, Sudhir.
Right. Mr. Ganapathi, thank you very much for that very exhaustive summary of different sectors. What are the changes that we are likely to see? What will be the new normal in many of those sectors? You mentioned about trust but verify. You could well have been talking about fake news, given the kind of fake news that is going around COVID-19. You spoke about video conferencing likely to kind of gather steam, more and more of diplomats taking to video conferencing instead of physical kind of meetings. So that is going to be a new normal. The other new normal, the Prime Minister mentioning the other day, yesterday in fact, about wearing masks, that masks are going to become one of the new normal. I have one question which I will put out before I go. I'll start taking questions from our listeners. What kind of specific challenges do you see for Indian diplomacy? And when I say Indian diplomacy, I mean your tribe. You know, what do Indian diplomats need to do now? How do they tweak India's diplomatic strategy so that India does not miss the bus, the economic diplomacy specifically?
I think the most important thing would be, I think, keep your eyes and ears open, because I think what we need is, as somebody had said, don't just keep your seat warm, keep your feet moving always, because that is the most important point. If we sit in our air-conditioned offices, we are not going to see how the world is shaping up or how the countries we are posted to is responding and reacting to various events globally. In terms of businessmen and business opportunities, I think COVID-19 and the pandemic in the new normal has created greater challenges, because movement of the people within countries and between countries will be more sort of constrained, in the sense that if airlines had 120 seats, they're going to give you only 90 seats in the future. So this will create more pressure on the airlines and movement of people. And what we should do is, if we interact regularly with the various ministries in India, look at what we need in terms of either energy or in terms of, say, export opportunities, right from meat to engineering goods to IT opportunities, and match them in the country where we are posted to. In fact, the IT sector has always been the most ideal opportunity for us to take things forward. In fact, I remember in Africa, we used to say that India did not focus on the extractive industry because that was seen as exploitation, but it looked at capacity building. And capacity building is going to be an immense opportunity for us to create greater interaction between business forces of either country. Right. And then, of course, use the available opportunities of, the Ministry of External Affairs has this thing called the Development Partnership Administration, which has been set up from 2011, primarily as a one-shop window for Indian business houses and businessmen to look at availing of opportunities in various countries in Africa or Latin America or elsewhere. And what we do is, the government not only provides for greater interface and interaction with Exim Bank and the countries where this operation is necessary, but also allows for a process of auditing, because that is the most important. Right. So if that is there, that will be good.
Okay, fine. We'll start taking questions from our listeners. May I ask Aishwarya to unmute Archana Jatkar? She has a question for the ambassador. Archana,
Hello. Yes. Hi, this is Archana. I'm representing the Indian pharmaceutical industry. And my question to the ambassador is, congratulations, sir, for covering such a wide spectrum in your 10-minute speech. My question to you is, going forward, would we expect a change in the global order? And if so, how do you see India placing it, and which industry do you think should make India achieve that kind of a place? And my question, because I come from a pharma industry, I'm closely involved with the diplomacy and the trade related issues that are ongoing between India, US, and many other countries. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Archana. That's a very absolutely correct question, because today I think the medicine world and the pharmaceutical industry is right on top of everybody's notepad and scratch pad, so to say, because I think HCQ has been sort of ruling the waves and ruling the media, and so has been azithromycin. But I think for India, I think the pharmaceutical sector is going to be a very key player in terms of our economic, our exports, so to say. In fact, in Africa, which I was, in my last posting, I was overseeing interaction with Africa. A lot of Indian pharmaceutical products go to Africa, and they do appreciate the fact that India has been able to provide for quality pharmaceutical products at fairly reasonable rates. Inexpensive would be a good point. I never use the word cheap. I use the word inexpensive or reasonable rates, because that is what it is, because quality products at reasonable prices is what we look at. Of course, one of the things which the pharmaceutical industry has to do, as we have been talking of, is look at how do we substitute or provide for domestic active pharmaceutical ingredients to be developed within our country rather than depend on other countries. And that is going to be a key element in our export of pharmaceutical products. But I think on pharma, I have no doubt at all that this is going to be one of the top items in our trade basket. And that will be greatly appreciated, particularly what we have done now in terms of HCQ and paracetamol to not only USA, UK, France, the SAARC countries, Mauritius, Seychelles, but globally, everywhere else.
Right. The next question comes from Mr. Muralidharan. Mr. Muralidharan, please ask your question. Yeah.
No, right now, post-COVID, while we are all anticipating the lockdown, post-COVID, I mean the post-lockdown period, we hope that things will improve. But the white goods and other cars and automobiles and all brick and mortar stuff, purchase decision is going to be quite cautious by everybody, because everybody is going to not be very easy on the purse. So that's a very important factor for the economic, the cycle of economy to move faster. What would you be your take on that, please?
Sorry, I missed the second part. I think there's some.
Okay. No, I said that the purchase decisions by the common man in terms of white goods and all the brick and mortar stuff is going to be a little cautious. And that has to be paced up for the economy to spiral up. So I wanted your views on that, please.
No, Mr. Murali, I think absolutely agree with you, because I don't think there can be any other alternative at all on this subject, because I think for the common man, I think the first thing is to ensure that he has enough funds in his budget, so to say, to look for what he has. Because I think while many of us may have been protected by receiving our salary or whatever it is on time, there are a multitude of people who have not been able to receive even a single paise perhaps into their kitty. So obviously for him, the food basket would be important. Schools and other things, school, health. It will be food, health, school, which would be the most important. I don't think he will have much idea or time to look at automobiles or white goods with that seriously as he would.
In fact, my thought was, even if the person who has the money may possibly be cautious about it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt at all. So he would need money to flow in before he thinks of other things. And priorities. I think everyone will have to prioritize what he needs. Does he need a washing machine, or does he need to ensure that his child is able to get distance education in the best possible way?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, our next listener who wants to ask a question is Mr. Tulsian, and he's going to ask a very China-specific question. Mr. Tulsian, please go ahead.
This origin.
Wait.
Unmuted.
I think
This, Mr. Ambassador, you know, the world view is that this pandemic has originated in Wuhan from China. As a result, the world has suffered huge losses, and that China has to make good these losses, and they also want to conduct inquiry against China on this account. What will be the impact of such a demand by the world from China on the world scenario?
Well, I think the government of India has been very, very careful. I mean, there's no doubt that there's all significant evidence pointing out to the fact that COVID-19 originated in China. But, you know, the government of India would perhaps feel that this is not the right time to look at these things. What we need first is to set a semblance of world order. And that order, so world order would mean that let us address the issue of ensuring that people are cared for, that the health factors are addressed. I would like to point out one interesting point here in terms of various states in the United Nations also having gone to court against the People's Republic of China. But in terms of governments, there is a thing called the Sovereign Immunity Act. So governments are immune, but we don't know what other ways would be. But I think the government of India's view, again, in another way is that we do not like to shout things from the rooftops. If we want to do anything, we do it bilaterally, because for us, ensuring the safety and security of our own nationals in that country. You know, when you mentioned Wuhan, we had to bring back our students from Wuhan. We had to ensure that people are safe there. And I'm sure when all this is over, businessmen will still go back to China for trade. And we need to ensure that in a system they have, our people do not face difficulties of the order which many other countries would face. You saw that happening to the two Canadian nationals. I think one point here, if I might point out, Sudhir, in terms of diplomats, the role of diplomats vis-a-vis the diaspora is very, very crucial. I think providing for protecting and ensuring the safety and security of the diaspora is of paramount importance. And that is why we were able to bring our people from China, from other countries, the United Kingdom, from France, and the Gulf countries, to ensure that they do not suffer there. Because in a foreign country, if you're left without funds and without any wherewithal, you'll be more difficulty than you would be in your own country.
Right.
You replied very India specific.
Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Ambassador, you spoke about agriculture while in your address. In fact, there is a question related to that from Somi Hazare. If Somi Hazare could come in next.
Yes. Thank you very much. Ambassador, as all of us are aware, the rural distress caused by this COVID has also been huge. So far, we've had only a few people in terms of percentage returning from the urban areas and some from abroad. Seeing this issue at the rural level increase to much higher levels, don't you think this will have a much bigger impact, especially when rains have come at the wrong time and the agriculture crop has been bad? And as we are all made aware by the media, because of migrant labor not being available, transportation not being available, this has affected agriculture produce in a large way. Your comments, please.
No, I think, Somi, there is no doubt that what has been happening would not allow for equitable development and equitable distribution of food and wealth, so to say. And it would have major discord But what we need to look at is like today's meeting, the third meeting between the Prime Minister and the Chief Ministers, would have looked, we don't know what had happened, would have looked at certain aspects of the relaxation norms as would come in the coming days, post May 3 or whenever the final lockdown is lifted. So I think this has to be a point which will have to be looked at between the center and the states, and it will not be Delhi and the state capitals, but it will have to percolate down to the districts, to the panchayats, to the tehsils, and to the final farmer. So obviously, if you are not going to ensure that the farmer in the field or the rickshaw puller or whoever is selling you vegetables on the thela is not provided for with his requirement of money, whatever be it, for his basic necessity and for his essential needs, I think there will be a lot of concern which could lead to other things which might not be necessary. So I'm sure the government, both at the center and the state, will consider this with all seriousness and ensure that we do not come to such a pass.
Thank you.
Right. Ambassador Ganapathi, the last question on today's webinar session comes from Mr. Mohan Narayanan. Mr. Narayanan, please go ahead. Mr. Narayanan, could you hear me?
Yeah, I got it. I was on mute, Sudhir. Sorry for that.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to lower my hand, but I got delayed. But sir, great presentation. My question was also on the China issue. But just to prod you a little further, do you think China versus the rest of the world could become a big talking point and an action point in the future? Also, I want to connect to I heard what you said, but India did talk about some restrictions or review of the FDI investments from China into our country. Whereas, US has not said anything on that sense. So I want to hear your comments on this.
Yeah, Mohan, I think, yes, China will always be omnipresent in every discussion room. I think because of the inherent strength which it has generated itself today, it is the second largest economy. It's got a huge landmass. It has developed not only its economy, but also its defense and security perspective. Its outreach and overreach has been tremendous. And while there are countries which would swear by China, China has also brought in concerns in many other domains, so to say. So that's why I think when you talked of the Thucydides trap, I think the question of a rising superpower and an established superpower comes in. But lest people look at it otherwise, I would continue to maintain, which I've been maintaining for the past couple of years. I don't know how it will be in the next couple of years. The United States cannot be written off as perhaps the strongest country in terms of financial and defense presence. And the United States will continue to be there in various parts of the world. Now, what has also happened, which has been reflected in some of the news media at least, is that the Chinese activities in the Spratly and Paracel Islands, Nangsha and Shangsha, in terms of moving forward, and that has created some concern among the 6 odd countries there, that is Taiwan, Philippines, the 5 or countries, that is Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, and some others. So I think this is going to be a matter, and that is where, when people talk about various developments in South China Sea or the East China Sea or wherever, I think the question which I've mentioned, trust, confidence, will become very, very important. And that is where I think the 2 informal summits we had, interestingly in Wuhan, was the first summit between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping. And the second summit, of course, took place some 50 kilometers down the road from my house, so to say, in Mamallapuram. So obviously, I think those informal summits have provided a great opportunity for the leaders to talk to each other and set aside whatever doubts, apprehensions, or otherwise they might have had of each other. In terms of your second question, in on restrictions, as you put it, I won't call it a restriction on FDI, because every government has a sovereign right to protect its national interest when it comes to it. This question of the particular regulation only talked of countries sharing a land border with India, one. Two, it removed from the automatic route. So the approval route is still there. Any country can look at the approval route and come in. There is no regulation which has prohibited countries from investing in India through the approval route. So I think there is no reason for any country to worry about it. And of course, the government of India is also equally concerned and would be happy to ensure that FDI processes which comes to the FIBB are not delayed beyond a point, because if they're going to be an investment, they will ensure that it's done faster and not slowly. Just give me half a second. I'll just sort of disconnect that. Sorry, there was some intercom buzzing. I'm sorry that to be put up. So I think
these are the perils of a webinar being conducted from home. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ganapathi, for your brilliant perspective and take on various sectors on what is being called as the 9/11 moment for almost the entire world. Thank you very much for your perspective. May I request Mr. Ashokan Krishnamurthy to conclude our first webinar session.
Yeah. Good evening, friends. It gives me great pleasure in thanking Mr. M. Ganapathi for sparing his time, valuable time, I would say, because, the question of expanding on this COVID-19 and its impact is something which is almost an unending topic with a large number of questions. But the way he has presented his perspective has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, Mr. Ganapathi, for your thoughts on this entire issue. This seminar has been, webinar, I beg your pardon, has been the handiwork of South India Chamber of Commerce, led by Mr. Ganapathi, R. Ganapathi, the president, and of course, not to forget Mr. Raghavan and his team. They have done an excellent work in coordinating the entire thing. And of course, MITRAA. MITRAA, by the way, is a multifaceted tax management and legal consultancy organization. And the purpose of conducting this kind of a webinar, the first series which you have conducted right now, is to take and get a proper perspective on all aspects which are likely to have an impact on arising out of COVID. The next one apparently is tomorrow at 3 p.m. instead of 4 p.m. Please note the time, it is 3 p.m. instead of 4 p.m. Mr. Sudhir, thank you very much for hosting this and coordinating this as an anchor. I think words will be failing me if I have to really carry on with complimenting you on this. Thank you very much for anchoring this entire discussion. And finally, all the participants who have attended this meeting and of course raised important questions, a big thank you to them. And finally, I would be failing in my duty if I don't thank the sponsors, Century Flour Mills, who have taken the trouble of being sponsors for this event. I do hope that the help and cooperation which we have been receiving from all the stakeholders will continue in the days to come. Incidentally, this webinar, the first series of the webinar, will be running from Monday through Friday, and we are hoping to have the second and the third series also, the details of which will be furnished in due course. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you. I couldn't see the face at all.